Today we're going to be power ranking every team I have drafted in Pokemon Draft League since coming back to YouTube just over a year ago. If you're excited for today's video, make sure to like and subscribe. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers this year. Every subscription helps a ton towards hitting that goal. So the goal of this video is going to be to rank all of these teams. So you see here we have 9 teams that we featured on the channel over the course of the last year and maybe 3 months. They kind of range from, a lot of different formats, a lot of, Scarlet and Violet here. We do have some ADV drafts, some ORAS here as well, and some low tier. So a little bit of spice in there. But we're going to be ranking all of these teams, talk about why they're in their ranking from S to D, some lessons learned, and how you could apply some of these drafting principles to your teams, and some mistakes you can learn from that I made along the way. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into my first draft that I did since coming back, which was BBR Season 6 in June of 2023. And this is a pretty easy one for me. So this team had Dragapult, Terra Volcarona, Iron Hands, and then we got into some really good utility Pokemon like Diancie, Vaporeon, Palisand, Iron Jugulus. A lot of good stuff here. For me, this is an easy yes. This is probably one of the best teams I've had in quite a while. The real thing is, if we look at this team and kind of evaluate it, it's kind of hard to get a team like this. There's a reason this team is an S. And that's because Dragapult and Terra Volcarona are 2 Pokemon that are pretty much banned in all formats of SV at this point. So if you have 2 ban-worthy Pokemon on your team, it's pretty hard to not put it in S tier. And Iron Hands is a Pokemon I think is really dominant in the SV metagame. Not really as like a top 1 or 2 pick, but really just like in that round 3, if you can hit that round 3 sweet spot, it does so much for your team offensively and defensively. It's a perfect Pokemon to patch so many holes that teams have. So if you have the opportunity to get Iron Hands, especially in round 3, make sure to take that opportunity. I don't think a lot of people are going to be leaving it for you at that point. So we're starting off hot. Next we have BBR Summer Scramble. This was in about August of 2023. So after BBR Season 6, right into Scramble. This was an interesting team. So we had Tornadus, Therian, Garchomp, Terra Okidogi. So this was kind of that mid-tier Terra. A little bit, we had stuff like Terra King Gambit allowed and Terra Chiyu. I had Screamtail, Rotomwash, Scizor. I had a really, really powerful top 6. And then a Pokemon like Misdreavus, which has a lot of utility against stuff like Ursaluna. And then Lilligant just like in the back. Just there's some value you can get there every once in a while. Where do I put this team? This team, I'm gonna put it in the B tier. I really was thinking about putting this team in A tier, but one of the things that really holds me back in this scenario is that there were Pokemon like Terra Sneasler, Terra Ursaluna Blood Moon, Terra Scaladirge, Terra Sneasler mainly, and King Gambit. Like there's so many better Terra Pokemon that I could have gotten instead of Terra Okidogi, even though that Pokemon had just come out at the time. Really wanted to use it. And this team was just a really, really good balanced team, and I honestly maybe should put in an A because of how good of a balanced team was, even though I didn't really take the opportunity to maximize the power level on this team. Because Torn, Garchomp, Screamtail, Rotomwash, and Scizor are just such a powerful combination of Pokemon. I think I convinced myself I'm going to put it in A, but I think it's a very, very low A, and I think that's part of because we got Okidogi as a Terra. We wanted to try it out as a Terramon. I know OG Alvine and I were talking a lot about it going into GBU and this tour about getting that Pokemon. But at the end of the day, I think, you have to really kind of read the board in these situations. And when you see these high power options, especially with Terra, you have to take advantage of that in your team building. Chiyu, Sneasler, King Gambit, to name a few. Like, you need to be drafting these type of Pokemon in your draft. And I understand, there's going to be time and a place to draft, for creativity and for fun. And Okidogi was that case here. But to a certain extent, make sure you're drafting the best Pokemon available and not leaving resources on the table. Getting a Pokemon like potentially Garchomp, for example, could have been better served as one of these very powerful Terra captains. And then we could, take the Okidogi pick, turn it into something different here. That would be the one change I would make, but I think the core of the team was really good. I think I played this team not the best in the tournament, unfortunately. As I said, this was still in the era where I was really just getting back into draft, making a lot of key mistakes. But I think this is A, but it could be between B and A. I'm going to punish myself for the Okidogi pick and say I think we should be optimizing our Terra drafts and our picks to not go for content all of the time. and I'll punish myself for that, putting it in B tier. Next up was a season to forget. This is GBU. If you'll know, I had the thumbnail of my video that I was going to get Excalibur banned because it got scale shot going into this league. I had a lot of good things going on this team, though. This was a low-tier Terra league where I had Terra Gyarados, Electric, and Flying as Terra. This Pokemon's crazy as a Terra captain. This Pokemon really opened my eyes to low-tier Terra being pretty much unviable as a way to play Draft League at this point. And there's a reason we've kind of moved back to high-tier Terra. As this Pokemon was 12 points, but it was easily like one of the best Pokemon on my team. It was better than Bax. I had Greninja on this team. You could argue it was about equivalent to a Greninja, so that's just such a point delta to kind of make up for there, and really just kind of breaks the balance of the board. And it was my 7th round pick, and it did put up that much value. Like I think that's kind of where you see these low tier Terra kind of ideas fall through. It's just like the real delta in value, and if you start to ban much past this, the Pokemon don't have a lot of use coming every week. But we had a lot of interesting things here. We had Greninja was really good on this team. That's one of my favorite Pokemon, I think, of all time in Draft League. Iron Hands round 3, just once again, very, very powerful Pokemon, as we alluded to in the BBR Season 6 team. Just really good offensively and defensively. We had Tinglu. I think I played my Tinglu really poorly this season. It was just a Pokemon I just didn't really have my wits about me with playing it. And then stuff like Screamtail was really nice. I had Amoonguss, which I never brought. Arcanine Hisui, which was really good for one game and didn't do much else. But I'm going to put this team into C tier. And the reason I'm going to put it into C is I drafted a non-option round 1. That's got to be what it be. You know what? I'm going to put it in D tier. I think, a lot of this is going to be based on my performance to a certain degree. I think Excalibur is just undraftable as a first round pick, and this team, as a result, was just super passive and super mid. My offensive engine was pretty much only Greninja and Iron Hands had to be defensive a lot of the time in this battle, in these teams, and had to really rely on DD Gyarados. So I think this is a D team. I think this is kind of a real lesson to learn, is make sure you're guaranteeing value with your first round pick. Pokemon that came after the fact. Ursaluna Blood Moon would have been a great pick. Meowscarada, a Pokemon I've used a lot recently, would have been a great pick. Great Tusk went after. Like, I should have just taken Great Tusk. Palafin, Garchomp, so many things I could have guaranteed value with. And I ended up with a Excalibur, which, unfortunately, not the best. We go from bad to worse here in terms of play. We get into BBR Season 7 at this point, and this was a time in my draft career where I think it was probably at my worst. We were doing the WBG, the VGC League, which is not here because VGC is completely different, and I couldn't even tell you if that's a good VGC draft team or not. But this team was really interesting. I had Palafin, Meowscarada, and Raging Bolt. 3 Pokemon I think are very, very good. I've used a lot of Meowscarada. I've used a lot of Raging Bolt now. And then Palafin is just one of the best Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet draft. The problem is this team fell off the rails quickly. Clefable in round 4. I love Clefable. I really do. I loved using it in ORAS. I really even like it in the old gens too. It's almost gotten banned in Gen 4 OU. So much to love about Clefable, but it feels like at some point the generations kind of passed this Pokemon by in terms of what I'm used to using it for. I had one of my ground resists being Bronzong. Bronzong's just not a great Pokemon. Skeledirge, really good with Terra. Without Terra, hard to leverage. My Terra Captain, this is when we did super low tier Terra, so stuff like Kilowattrel, Braviary, Hisui were some of the best Terra captains. Yanmega, and I ended up with Cyclizar, which I think is quite frankly on the balance pretty okay. I think it's like not the worst Terra captain, but wasn't really doing a lot here. I had Okidogi and Iron Jugulus again on this team. Okidogi, honestly, one of the better Pokemon on this team to kind of operate as one of those just like bulky Pokemon that can take some hits decently and make some offensive pressure. But I think where this team suffered, I think Clefable is a little bit washed, unfortunately, in this generation. And I think Skeledirge and Bronzong, just to round out the defensive core, was just a lost idea here. And this team very quickly ended up in a place where we had a really good top end in Palafin, Meowscarada, Raging Bolt, but the support around it just didn't result in constructive teams very frequently. So the lesson really here to learn from is I think you could draft Clefable, but I think there are Pokemon like Screamtail that are just going to be better. They're cheaper. Stuff like Skeledirge, you really need Terra on this Pokemon to make it worth your while, especially at 12 points. And then Bronzong, like this can't be your steel or your ground resist, unfortunately. So a lot of mistakes. Let's put this in C tier. We're here now with our first old gens draft. We got 2 in a row here for this time frame. We got Emerald Open. I drafted a Snorlax Gengar team, which is honestly one of the really middling draft duos, and that's why I'm going to put this in B tier. A lot of the things I like about this team here, Moltres and Glalie are 2 really high value Pokemon in ADV. Glalie is the best spiker in the tier for the price by far. Definitely want to do a video on that Pokemon, so stay tuned and get subscribed for that, where we're going to talk about Glalie and ADV. But, you know, that really good spiker just opens up stuff for Snorlax really in general. Well, Moltres is a great way to break steel types in this generation. One of the Pokemon that's really risen to, you know, popularity over the last year or so in, you know, in quite a few generations, not just ADV, in Scarlet and Violet as well. Blastoise was a great spinner. Meganium is a great answer to Raikou on this team. And then Primeape, this is where I think the points were maybe a little bit misaligned. Primeape and Aggron, I probably just didn't need to take Aggron. I could take something like a Metang, get a more defensive, you know, a stronger fighting type. Maybe get something like a Machamp. But Machamp I wouldn't have had the points for. A Hariyama, for example. I guess I wouldn't have the points for that either. I should have been able to find a better fighting than Primeape. I like Primeape. It's good for the speed tier at 95, but defensively, not the greatest. Makes it hard to get in frequently to leverage it. But I think this is a B tier mainly because I think that top 2 core of Gengar Snorlax is kind of a common core at this point. But realistically, it's a 50% win rate core for a reason. And that's kind of why I want to put it in B tier. Like, this is very much a B team, a B type of team. You got a good spiker, a decent core, and some good support around it. But you certainly could have had Pokemon like Immense, a Metagross, or a Raikou to really take this team to the next level. Next up, we have the ORAS Cup team. This is the Yard Crest team. And when we talk about drafting, a lot of the things that I'm looking for here is drafting for optimal team cores and drafting to win. This team is, I would say, drafted for fun. So I had the first overall pick in this draft, and we're going to throw it in B tier as well. But I think I like this as a B tier because I think this team maximized what I could do with the limitations I set out for myself. So this, as you know, for those who don't know or haven't watched the video, this is the Charizard Y Cresselia team, where I forced that team in the ORAS Cup in the Smogon tournament. So I had the first overall pick, end up with Lando T into Yard Crest, then drafted Latios after the fact as my hazard removal. Would really have not liked to have done that with Crest and on my team already. Would have liked a better removal, but unfortunately, that's kind of the hand you're dealt in ORAS at certain points. The removers are few and far between, and that created a pretty glaring Greninja weakness on my team. Which, if you're going to be forcing archetype, like these new ideas and new archetypes like this, you really have to be mindful. Like, there are reasons that we have set cores in a lot of these formats, especially old gens. Like these old gens like ORAS and Usum, I would say are pretty close to being solved. And once you start to move outside those solved cores, you start to really find yourself opened up to weaknesses. Like for my example, Greninja, even though I have the Son of Charizard Y, if they get up a Stealth Rock, Greninja has a really good time against my team. And that's why it's going to be limited to B. I'm happy that this team ended up being a B, given the limitations that I set. But when you're setting yourself hard limitations like that, you're going to end up in situations where you have to make suboptimal picks. And that's what we ended up with here. This one, though, I'm really excited for. LTM. We've had a couple middling drafts here, but we're back to where we want to be. This was an S tier draft. This is going to be my last S tier draft I've done since coming back. This team, I was going to say, was the best LTM team this season, where I made semifinals. But the team I lost to, Vepsis, I think his team just was better in general. His team was, I think, otherworldly in this format. But what I really liked about this team is Terra Iron Leaves was a great find on this board. You see a lot of people going for Pokemon like Terra Toxtricity, Yanmega, Iron Thorns, Monkey Dory, for example. We had Palmot, Braviaries, but Iron Leaves, I think, was by far the best Terra captain in the league this season. And we supported that Pokemon wonderfully. Crocodile is our first round pick. Didn't get a lot of kills, wasn't really relevant offensively, but man, is that ever a great defensive Pokemon against the low tier. Uxie, great utility Pokemon, great resist check for Crocodile, take those fighting moves very well. Empoleon was great. Okidogi comes back onto this team, and in low tier, just an absolute menace, taking hits from a lot weaker Pokemon, and it's still got the strength to contend in high tier, and it contended in low tier as well. We had Regidrago. Wow, in a format like low tier, where there are not a lot of fairy type Pokemon, Regidrago just overperformed. And if you're doing a low tier draft, I really recommend you taking Regidrago. When you look at how few fairy types there are in low tier that are worth picking up, you'll see the value of Regidrago pretty quickly. And then the rest of the team was not really too relevant much throughout the season. I think Salazzle overperformed as well. I think that's a Pokemon that gets a lot of flack in regular draft, but in low tier certainly has a lot of utility. Same with Mimikyu. I think if you look at Mimikyu as just a way to protect against something that could just go completely wrong and use its disguise ability for that purpose, great Pokemon. And then Godcloth. You know, Joey Pokegame, he used Cloth with Terra to great effect in the low tier league P4G that they did. This is a good defensive Pokemon for me, don't get me wrong. I didn't get to use any offensive nonsense with this Pokemon, but a great 4-pointer in low tier, and easily I think my best draft I've done where Pokemon that should be allowed in these tiers were allowed. Alright, we're getting in now to the drafts that you've actually seen on the channel within the last couple of weeks, or in the last couple of months. We go to PBR Season 8, and this was a really interesting draft. So this is where we banned a lot of Pokemon from the tier list, and it created a really awkward draft board. And we had the 16th pick here, and I'm actually going to put this in A tier. So our first A tier team here. And one of the things I would say about this draft, so this was a Meowscarada, Iron Hands, Volcarona, Screamtail, Landorus, Blastoise draft, and those were the 6 Pokemon I brought almost every week. I brought Dragonite a few times, Registeel a few times, Bruxish came once against Palafin. We brought it for the Palafin matchup, and it was pretty good there. But that's a very low-powered team, and you can maybe argue it's like, well, your team in B had a little bit more power than your team in A for Scramble. Why would you rank that higher? Like maybe your ORAS team maybe had a little bit better. You know, you had Zardwai, Lando. Maybe your Emerald Open team, you think that you really like Snorlax and Gengar. The reason I put this at A is I think this team, in terms of the fundamentals of drafting, was the best drafted team of Season 8. I think it was the best constructed team, and I think it was the one team that really looked at the board and the situation we were in, and I think prioritized the right thing. And what I prioritized in this draft was we were not going to get the powerful options. Like, we weren't getting the Ursaluna Blood Moons, the Darkrai's, the Terapagos, the Garchomps, the Palafins. We were really, at this point, like, Meowscarada was the best option that we had on the board. Like, I guess, like, Greninja, you know, could have been an option there too, but it was taken in round 1. Like, I would have loved a Greninja round 1 given this board, but we ended up with Meowscarada into Iron Hands, which is where I'd like to be round 2 to 3, to be honest, instead of round 1 and 2. And I think what this team did better than most of the players in this pool was identify that, okay, this draft board is much lower. The value to be had in this board is to cover your roles early. Meowscarada covers so many different roles. Being one of the fastest Pokemon in the metagame, I really stress in my building and in my prep, having the fastest Pokemon in the matchup is really crucial to simplifying your building. Really helps you hone in on what the possibilities, especially for Choice Scarfers, can be. Iron Hands, as just like a catch-all in a format like this that's a little bit less powerful, just simplifies prep so much. I love Volcarona. This wasn't Terra this time. I took this personally because one of the things I was worried about going into the later parts of the draft is I really like having a takeover threat available on all of my drafts, and with, you know, having a takeover setup sweeper as a threat and as a way to just win the game is something I'm really comfortable having. So Volcarona was a pretty obvious no-brainer here in round 3, but Screamtail, super great utility. Landorus falls at round 5, that's great. We got a Rapid Spinner this time, which kind of makes sense here on this team. This team in the first 4 is a little bit spike weak, but this also then provides another win condition. So threatening, you know, the stacking against my team, while also threatening Shell Smash. And then I think this team, fundamentally, all of the roles were covered much earlier than everyone else's roles in terms of getting multiple Stealth Rockers and Hazard Setters in Meowscarada, Screamtail, Lando, having really good defensive checks in Iron Hands, Screamtail, Getting a decent hazard removal, especially in a situation where my team was not winning quick. We're going to have to face a lot of turns with this team. So in a metagame where I don't stress hazard removal as being really important at all, I think you can just ignore it as a role for the most part. I think, that was really, good to pick up there. And then, Dragonite just as a late round pick just to kind of round things out. I think this was an A because of the fact that this draft identified the way to draft in this board was to prioritize those roles early. The powerful Pokemon can win you the game, certainly, but you're going to run out of these role players really quickly, and if you have the best ones, it's kind of like I was describing to Owen. It's like you're playing Call of Duty, you're playing against someone with max prestige, maxed out attachments and everything, and you're like level 10, you got the guns. It's like you can outskill, outbuild, outprep everyone, but you're a little bit undergunned. But I think that was the way to go in this draft because of the fact that the power level was just a little bit lower and the roles were just that much more scarce. We move into the final two teams. We're going to get through this quickly. We have JJDL. I'm going to put this in A tier. This was a draft board that I came up with where we banned a lot of Pokemon. Make sure to check out that video. Really interesting theory video on why, a lot of these Pokemon probably shouldn't be allowed in Draft League. Really good thing to go there. But this team, I'm putting in an A tier. This maybe could be an S tier. I don't like Terapagos as a round 1 pick. Now, I did have Greninja as a classic round 2 save your round 1 pick, and Raging Bolt. And I think Terapagos, as I use it, I started to enjoy it a little bit more. But I'm putting this in A tier mainly because I'm also putting in A tier because I got too many Pokemon I think that I deserve for this team. My team, we didn't actually draft this. We all built our teams from the board and what we would like. And I ended up with Landorus, regular Ogerpon, Screamtail, Arcanine. I had 7 Pokemon that I would be confident with in my top 5 on this team. Arcanine overperformed. It was my second kill leader on this team. I faced a bunch of King Gambits, and this Pokemon just is great versus that. Screamtail, as I said, it's just one of the best role players in Draft League at this point, just because of how fast it is. It has Encore, it has hazards, it can be a setup sweeper. We saw that in BBR. Ogerpon is just such a good 110 to have access to. Lander is great defensively. There's so much to like about this team, but I can't put it in S because we built these teams and didn't draft them. So the likelihood that you can actually replicate something like this is basically impossible, considering how good these Pokemon are. And the fact that I think that this is, I think that's just the main reason. This team is better than I think you could realistically take a learning experience from. And I just think, limiting it to being an A, I think is fair given what we did in this tournament. And then finally, we end off with the tournament that ended this past week for me, the BBR Summer Scramble. We got knocked out in pools, unfortunately, and I'm going to put this in C tier, not because we got locked out of pools. We lost to Kazan. We had roles actually that we were going to win that game with, and we were tactically favored to win that game at the end. But the real reason I'm putting in here is I love Latios, I love King Gambit, Terra, I love Sneasler. Those 3 Pokemon as a duo, as a trio, unbelievable. They're really, really great offensively. I can't say enough good things about that offensive core. The problems start to come in the rest of the draft. Azumarill was a great 4th option on this team. It's a really good soft check to so many of the powerful fighting and dark types in this generation. Scizor was another really good defensive check as well, really powerful Pokemon, but the wheels kind of fell off a little bit at the end. I took Drifblim. I think Drifblim is a really good way to protect against a lot of random things that could just happen. A Mickey protection is one of the things to look for in draft, especially in 8mon where you're not going to be able to beat everything. So what are ways you can do to kind of cheese your way back into a game? Drifblim can do that. I really wanted Thwackey to come back to this team, to go Palossand Thwackey or something to really just end this draft, but Bick took it right before me, which ruined a little bit of that plan. And then I took Palossand and Braviary. Braviary was just a non-factor in this tournament, and I love Palossand. Palossand's good, but you don't want to have to over-rely on it, and I had to over-rely on it on this team, which just ended up not being great. So I think this is a C tier. I really like the first 3, but I think Drifblim without the Thwackey was really tough to ever leverage. Palossand is a decent stealth rocker, decent soft check to things, but really gets pushed past very easily. Azumarill really good against the fightings. And Scizor without Roost, being relied on as a defensive check is a lot more difficult. So I think the defensive backbone of this team to pivot around and get in the Lottie, the Kingambit, and the Sneasler was just lacking a little bit too much. And I think we have to put it at C for that reason. It just, the defensive core just didn't mesh together at all and didn't lead for really good turns in this team. So we're going to put that at C tier. And so there you have it. Those are the teams that I've drafted since coming back to Pokemon Draft League. Let me know how you would rank these teams in the comments down below. Let me know what your best teams that you've drafted in Pokemon Draft League this past year are in the comments as well. That's all I have for today. We'll see you guys next time. And as always, have a wonderful day.